Coming up on the show, we take a look at the General Data Protection Regulation, and if your organization is in the European Union or you have customers or employees in the EU, this regulation applies to you. Now we'll show you how Microsoft 365 can help with your compliance journey. We'll walk you through service level controls that make Microsoft a trusted platform, how regulation control sets have been mapped to Microsoft Cloud capabilities, and we'll make the IT experience real with the things that you can configure as an admin. Joined today by Roy King from the Microsoft 365 team. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Jeremy.
So the General Data Protection Regulation, it's a pretty big deal. It comes into effect just around the corner, May 2018. Can you explain the basics around the regulation, what companies need to know and plan for?
Sure. So this regulation really sets a set of requirements that organizations make sure they're fully accountable for the personal information that they hold on both employees and customers in the European Union. So it applies to organizations wherever they are, whether they're headquartered in the EU or elsewhere, like here in the United States.
So even a small business that typically doesn't do direct business with Europe, are they impacted?
It could, absolutely. So what really important is whether your organization collects data on EU residents. So in that considered broader than traditional private information like age and race, social security number. It could include IP addresses or GUIDs even. And failure to comply with this can be result in some pretty hefty fines, so up to 4% of your parent company's annual revenue.
And just to get an idea, how many requirements and controls are really within that GDPR set?
So there are over 100 requirements that are part of the regulation, and you should learn more by visiting the link below. But what this really boils down to are the legal obligations for companies to have a good grasp on the personal data that they hold and to have the right processes and protections in place to ensure the access and flow of that personal data. And so, in the case of something bad happening, like a data breach, you're going to be obligated to notify the relevant authorities and potentially the people themselves within 72 hours.
So it's a really big step forward in terms of protecting individual privacy rights, but at the same time, it's a super high bar for IT. So how realistic is it then to really meet these compliance requirements with GDPR?
Yeah, it is a new high bar, and it will be challenging. But there are a lot of things that will go into the GDPR. And again, you should check out our GDPR site for the full set of guidance. And we know it's going to be a challenge, but we believe that the cloud is going to actually enable you to accelerate that compliance journey. And so when we think about regulation that appears around the world, we map each one to our control sets. And so from there, IT should consider three different aspects to operationalize those requirements. And the first is how your cloud vendor builds and operates its services. That's the foundation, the platform, things like encryption at rest and transit, privacy by design, and the fact that we have zero standing admin access. And so then you have your overall compliance strategy, and that's spans the people and processes that are specific to your industry and country. And then between those layers are the actual controls, configurations, the tools that you use to implement those services. And ultimately, it's a shared responsibility. So we have to, the service operator, need to provide those capabilities. We need to continually iterate to make sure you're up to date as new requirements surface, to give you the tools that you need to implement to meet your compliance needs.
So what are the things that we're doing to make sure that Microsoft services themselves actually meet the bar set by GDPR?
Well, we were one of the first companies to make contractual commitments guaranteeing our support for the GDPR, and the same was true previously for ISO and the EU model clauses, et cetera. So, given our work over the past decade, we've implemented, over 1,000 controls that is part of our compliance framework that are now built into these services from the ground up. How that works is by analyzing regulations worldwide and form a base set of requirements that our engineers use to develop features to protect your data. And this allowed us to do things like enable data sovereignty, to keep your data isolated in certain regions, or to apply advanced types of encryption and access control. We've already met the majority of industry requirements with regulations like FISMA, ISO, SOC, and others. So when you take a new requirement and you apply and contrast it to our existing control set, in most cases, those existing controls will meet those requirements. But there are other cases when we identify a new need and to build a new control. And so there are deltas between that new and previous regulations. And so in fact, with GDPR, we have identified the need for new controls that we'll be adding over the course of the year to the service to address those uniquely new requirements.
So if I'm an admin, how do I know which compliance regulations the service itself meets and what the controls are?
So we publish this information on the Microsoft Trust Center. And you can see that GDPR is front page news. So it's easy just to click on the Compliance tab here and then into Compliance Offerings. And there you can see the full list of regulations that we meet. And here, let me show you an example of how you can filter it. I'll just go into Office 365 and select the big international offerings that we have. So you can see, our support for ISO and SOC, et cetera.
So now this list of requirements actually show that Microsoft meets the standard to operate against all these different regulations, but you also mentioned their capabilities. How can you help translate what I need to implement?
I'm here in a new site for all of Microsoft Cloud Services called the Services Trust Portal. And within the portal, I can view two different types of documents. Here in compliance reports are those third-party assessments and audits of our different services for the different types of regulations that we saw earlier. And you can see here sort of the most recent documents. But I also have, under Trust Documents, available all of the Microsoft information that we provide to customers to help you better protect your data. And so we have lots of white papers and frequently asked questions, our penetration tests and security assessments. But here, let me click on Compliance Guides and go down to one of our Control Companion documents. So here's one for Office 365. And this will give you an example of really where it starts to get actionable for you. Now let me just click here on the CSC main or Customer Security Considerations. And this is where we've taken time to develop guidance for each control and map to our capabilities. And it provides guidance on what you should do and even mapping to the PowerShell commandlets or API where available.
So these are some great capabilities, and we'll show you the actions that you can take as an admin in just a second. But I know the team is actually working on some additional capabilities. Can you show us?
Yeah, it's early, but I'm excited to show you a sneak peek at our vision for the next version of the Service Trust Portal. Here you can see this idea of a compliance dashboard, and gives you a view of all of the controls for the different services and the status of your implementation. So across the different areas, we can break into the different services. And I'll just click on one. You can see what's in scope for these controls. You can see the Microsoft managed controls and look at the implementation details, the plan and findings, just like today. What's new is the customer managed controls, where you'll be able to go in, see guidance on implementing that, to be able to assign users and document your test plan and findings. So all of this will be reflected into the dashboard that you and your team will be able to return to track progress.
So in this case, Microsoft's taken the time to map all the controls to things that you can implement in Microsoft's cloud services.
Yes, we hope this will save you and your team a lot of time.
So let's make this real for IT. Let's take a look at a few different requirements from GDPR, and you can walk us through then some of the controls that we've built inside of Microsoft 365 to help. So here, if I take a look at Section 2, Article 32, I see something about security of processing. Now, the things that pop out at me, that you see in the bottom of this here, the controller and the processor have to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a certain level of security that's appropriate to the risk. To me, this kind of boils down to having a security plan to really tighten security within the documentation, things that are personal documents in my own environment.
Yes, and lots of regulations have had this kind of requirement before, so we have a number of controls that are mapped to it. And one of the things that we've built to actually help with that is the Office 365 Secure Score. And so this security analytics tool helps you understand what you've done to reduce risk to the data in your tenant, as well as what you can do to reduce it further. Now, with any admin role, you'll be able to go in and see the analysis of your environment and the score that's assigned based on the security settings. You can see here that even though we're a little above the average, we've gone ahead and set a higher target for what we believe is the right posture for us. Now, regularly reviewing this with your team will really help you document that you're tracking the state of your security and controls.
And I can see some actions here that it's actually giving me recommendations to do.
That's right. So for example, it's seen that not all of my global admins are enabled for multi-factor authentication. So an easy way for me to add an additional layer of security.
So the other thing you can do with this tool is actually print out or generate a PDF of all the different implementations and controls that we're going to do.
That's right. Just here in Score Analyzer, I can go in and see that past history, but more importantly, be able to export that action list.
And another aspect here, if we move back to my screen, I can see that each controller, where applicable, needs to make sure that they're maintaining a record of processing activities, including things like name and details of the controller, the purpose, the description of the categories of data. To me, this sounds a lot like auditing, and we can really help there in terms of controls that we have in Office 365 and the Security Center.
Yeah, let's go back to the Security and Compliance Center. Down here in the Search and Investigation tab, you see that we have the audit log search. And so from here you can see what all of the users and administrators in your organization have been doing, with activity related to email, documents, permissions, settings, and much more. So you can just look for particular types of activity or search for all, choose your start dates, and potentially even narrow down your search to specific users or sites. And there in the results, you'll be able to filter or pivot by IP address, users, or activity, and of course be able to export those results to take them for later monitoring.
So powerful auditing tools. One last example I want to show, though, is part of the introduction into GDPR, which says that in this case, there need to be controls or measures in place to mitigate risks using tools like encryption that also mark documents as confidential, especially for personal nature documents. This to me sounds like something else that we've built that we can help with called Azure Information Protection.
Yes. Example of another common customer consideration is that ability to classify and label personal content. So Azure Information Protection is a great tool for that. Let me give you an example. So, I'm an employee sitting at Contoso, and I've got a travel request form here that I might put in a bunch of my personal data to share with HR. Now, what I can do quickly, though, is here in the sensitivity, mark this request form as confidential. And you'll see there immediately in the background, it's gone ahead, created a watermark, and I can see here in the backstage that it's also go ahead and applied encryption here. So now let me go ahead and share that with you.
All right, so I saw that sharing link come in. I'm just going to go back to my PC here, and we'll see that as I try to open this travel request, I can see not only did you just mark this as being personal data, but it also encrypted that file using rights management services. So I get a message here that not only am I not allowed to see it, but it's been encrypted. So even if you sent that out to somebody else outside the organization, no one could look at it.
That's right.
So a lot to digest here in terms of GDPR and all the different tools that we can use to be able to comply.
Yeah, those were just a couple of examples of what you'd need to take action on. And there are over 1,000 controls, and we only demonstrated 3 here. You want to be tightly engaged with your compliance and security stakeholders responsible for implementing the GDPR at your organization.
So now for the folks watching this, where can they go to get more help?
So visit Microsoft.com/GDPR for more information, and also look to our great partners who can assist you with your overall governance program or helping with cloud migration.
So thanks, Roy, for the great introduction to GDPR for Microsoft 365. And you can also keep checking back to Microsoft Mechanics for the latest tech updates across Microsoft. We'll see you next time.